So speaking of that, these are 7 things, and this is actually the foundational principle of my whole dissertation of how I created my curriculum, because this article, I'll see if I can find it and upload it. If I forget to do that, feel free to email me and I'll send it to you just for your own information for later. But these 7 things, this is what makes learning stick. This is what it takes. So spaced learning over time is what I just talked about. You're able to talk about it once, bring it back up in a couple weeks, bring it back up in a month or two, and then a cumulative exam. That means they're probably going to retain it. This one here, interweave worked example solutions and problem-solving exercises. So this is really good for math. If you have a problem that you want them to solve, you could, here's an example, here it is modeled, and then you have the question right next to it. If you can intersperse it like that, it's easier. And I wish I would have brought up an example, but basically think about if you're doing addition and you want to teach them about adding 2 numbers together. So you gave an example of that, and right next to it, maybe you have 3 problems like it. Then a couple spaces down or a page or 2 down, you have a problem of how do you subtract a whole number, a big number from a smaller number, and then you let them practice it a couple times. So you're interweaving, here's the model, here's the solution of how you do it, and now do it yourself, okay? This one's good too. Obviously, this is very UDL-like, combine graphics with verbal descriptions. And also this one, connect and integrate abstract and concrete representations of concepts, just meaning if it's abstract, put something concrete with it. For example, if I worked on a grant at University of Kentucky while I was working on my PhD, and what I did notice there with the grant is that they were teaching fractions. So instead of fractions, can you imagine, you know, as a kid, that was probably the #1 thing I struggled with in school were the fractions, and I ended up being on a grant working on fractions. So I think it was justice in a way to make sure I really got it. But for me personally, I don't know what your thing was. Fractions was so abstract to me. I kept thinking, what in the world? There's a half, there's a third, there's a fourth, but half is smaller than 1, but there's, you know, it just goes on and on of just confusion. But if you can get out measuring cups as a teacher and say, okay, so we're going to make a dish or a cake, or, you know, something easy that you can do in the classroom, obviously not a cake if you don't have an oven, but you get out the measuring cup and you'd say, okay, so which one is bigger, a half or a fourth? And then the students start to get these concepts and think, oh, so I need 3/4. I could use the 1/4 measuring cup and use that 3 times. So you're taking something abstract and giving it a very concrete way. Okay, so that's basically what that means. Use quizzing to promote learning. This I found very interesting, and it's actually something I really didn't even get a perspective on from the research until I actually wrote that whole curriculum. So originally I did not have quizzes in my curriculum because I thought, oh, we're going to have a midterm exam, it'll be fine. But actually quizzing students on the work is what it takes to help them remember. So as you know, in this class, we started off with quizzes, which is a good principle, but for us, reading guides is the same. It's getting the same point across, but differently. So if you feel like that's better for your students, I'd say that's pretty equivalent to quizzing as well. Help students allocate study time efficiently. This is just teaching them good study principles. And then also questioning. That is a huge component of a good curriculum. So a lot of teachers don't ask questions, you know, they'll ask questions that are yes or no. If you in your classroom can start thinking about questions that are deep, so why do you think that happened that way? Can you explain to me the difference between this and this? And make them so that they're open-ended questions, that it actually makes them think. You could have them work in groups and answer the questions. You can have them ask or answer the questions out loud. Regardless, this is a huge, huge component in the learning, is a lot of questions. Make them think. It's deeper versions of learning. I'll have to go back through. There was a specific, I don't know why it's escaping my mind right now, but it's a whole genre of a name of what that's called. I'll go back and look at that. But anyways, the same point is there, is that questioning is huge. All right, so here are some effective practices that you can use as well in your classroom. Concept maps. This, can you imagine? So you're in a classroom and your teacher just tells you something, right? Okay, so there's this thing as a plant, and remember you're in second or third grade in this example, and okay, here's a plant, and it's a, you know, they don't actually have a plant, they're just talking about it. So plants have roots, and plants have leaves, and plants need sunlight to grow, and they need water and all these things. What if a student's never seen roots? What if they don't understand how the sunlight connects and all these different things? So that's what this is for, because if you visually can see that, you go, oh, okay, that's what the roots look like. It's in the ground. You could explain the water goes into the ground and affects the roots, and sunlight, you need all of these things. That's just an easier picture for some students to grasp onto rather than just words and then moving on, right? So concept maps are very, very helpful to students. I'm sorry, I forgot to change that. Imagine right now, use your imaginations and pretend that that says graphic organizer, because I just used concept maps twice accidentally. But graphic organizers are very, very useful for students, especially if you're wanting them to learn how to write an effective paper. A lot of students can't figure out, okay, I've got all this information, but I don't know how to organize it in my mind before I start writing. So something like this is wonderful if you're doing a biography or teaching a history class. You could do this, of course, in reading as well. There's thousands of graphic organizers out there. If you go look them up, you will find tons. So first of all, who's the person? What's their birth date? What's their death date? Give me some characteristics, some fun facts. Where were they in the world? On and on. So that helps, it helps them categorize in their mind. If you think about your own mind sometimes, and I know I can think this about my own mind half the time, is we have so much information in there, it looks like someone's junk closet, right? It's just info floating around, there's thoughts, there's like all these different things. This helps students sort out all the things you're telling them. So please use this as often as possible. And then effective practices, one more to note would be the student feedback. And this is crucial, but I'm not going to go in depth on this because I am asking you a question about that in your reading guide, and I don't want to be redundant. So that's going to be for you to find in your textbook, okay? So you will determine that. This is an amazing resource. So one of the next things about effective instructional practices is cooperative learning. This is, if you want to be that kind of teacher that's interactive, who helps your students kind of get up and move while they're still learning, and you need ideas, please purchase this book. I borrowed it from a teacher friend, and I used it through my course. And luckily, I kept finding people in my pathway that had this book, and I kept borrowing it. But I recommend to you, if you get the time or the money, ask for this for Christmas. If you're a nerd like me, this will be worth your time and money. This is the Kagan Cooperative Learning. And this one right here, if you can see my mouse, is the one that I would get. This is a secondary book if you end up loving it. These are engagement strategies. It's really good too, but this is like the pivotal foundational book that you would need. And let me show you a glimpse of what it would look like. I'm gonna have to switch over real quick. So if you get that book as your Christmas gift, if you're so inclined, or maybe that's just something you get when you're a teacher, ask for that as your graduation present or something. But here, I found this online, and I think what the person did was just literally copy what was in the textbook for a couple pages, even though the book's about 50 to 100 pages long, I can't remember. But it gives you so many ways that you can be an engaging teacher. For example, I'll write round robin. So in teams, students take turns responding orally. All students write each responses on their own paper. So first of all, they come together, you put a question on the board, and the four of them say, okay, I think it's this, I think it's this, I think it's this. And then afterwards, they're going to write it on their own paper. That helps the students who are really struggling in learning too, to hear different responses, to hear it from a peer. And then they're like, oh, I got it, finally. So a lot of these ways will help you address gaps and issues, especially if you're smart about matching the groups with a high to low learner. It's going to really help you as a teacher. So carousel feedback, teams rotate from project to project to provide feedback to other teams on a feedback form. So maybe they're walking around the room and they'd say, oh, I think this part of your assignment's good. And then they go to the next person and then they give them feedback as well. If you YouTube these, I'm telling you, there's probably examples of you could watch it in a classroom too. And I'm going to show you two examples of that, because I want you to be able to see how important this is and how fun it is too. And this is fun. I mean, play a card game to respond to questions. Each teammate has a role that rotates with each new question. So student 1 fans the cards. So you pick a card, any card, right? Student 2 picks and reads it. Student 3 answers it. And student 4 tutors or praises them. So then you kind of go around and take turns doing that. It's just fun. It's just a different way to teach that, especially if you have younger kids or if you have students with ADHD, on and on, they're going to love this because they're going to get to do some different things. Before I go to the video, I did want to note for you that with any type of interactive movement-based activity, anything like this, you have to have a tight grip on your classroom management, because this could turn into mass chaos if you do not have a hold on that. Because, for example, if you've got students, this game is where they all rotate around the room. I'll show you an example of that. And then they say, okay, pair up. If you don't have control of your classroom and they can't hear you or they're not listening to you, it's going to look like a mess. So keep that in mind, that you need to be very good about your attention getting cues. You have to have either you turn the lights off or you raise your hand or you clap 3 times or whatever it takes to get their attention. And you have to train them and practice over and over again. When I do this attention cue, here's how you respond. Now let's practice. Praise them. That was a great job. Let's practice that again. And you do it and you make it that an activity. You practice this with a fun, just random question. And then maybe the second or third time you start using content. So please note that with each of these, they're fun, they're interactive, but if you don't teach them how to do these procedures, just like Miss May talked about, it's going to be mayhem, okay? Just being real with you. There's tons more. I am going to give you this PDF as well. Keep this. It'll be very fun if you start student teaching. You could use some of these fun things as well. I think it will be really good for you. Tons and tons of options here. And what I like about it is that it even divides them into categories. So are you trying to build classroom morale or team building or social skills or decision making? Obviously, it talks about whether it's an academic task or an interpersonal task, but most of them are going to be both, I would most likely say. Okay, so keep that one in mind. Oh, I did want to show you this too, because I'm also going to put this in for you to download. Okay. Once again, Kagan is the thing. If you want anything for Christmas and you're not sure what to get this, or as a graduation present, once again. So this is out of the Kagan book as well. I think a teacher just made these for people, but it's basically a card to explain it. So if you print this out and maybe you print 25 of these, so each student, or maybe you print out 7 of them, so each table group will have instructions right in front of them in case they forget what you said. And it's even good for you if you need to remember what you're supposed to do. So it gives you a breakdown of each one of those Kagan cooperative learning games. Jot thought, it tells you step by step how to do it. Show me. Teacher poses a question. All students write on the whiteboards. I don't know why this is white instead of write. And the teacher says, show me, and then all students hold up boards. That's one that I've talked about a few times, right? If you have a student with communication issues in your classroom, you could have them all write on the whiteboard, because then they're all going to be able to answer. And then show me, and then they hold it up, and then as soon as they get it right, you can say, okay, I got you, I've got you, I've got you, I've got you, and then they can start putting it down. You could even have them self-monitor and have a little score sheet next to them so that they can calculate which ones they got right and wrong, and then they could turn that in so that you can use that as a formative assessment. It's a really good idea too. There's so many, I mean, we could spend 5 years on this, but that's why I'm just going to give it to you so you can have it as a resource. It gives you even ways to coach. I really like how you did this. What if you tried that? Because sometimes kids don't take feedback very well. So here's some good tips for that. Yeah, this would be a good social cue. So if you have students who have issues with social communication or working with peers, you could give them this and they could say, oh, I'm walking up to a friend. What do I say? All right, there you go. And you could practice that with them or practice it with a pair. Tons and tons of ways. And they even print out the cards for you for a couple of the games as well. Let's see what this is. I think this is just somebody who created these cards. So this is a resource for you that I will leave for you. I bet that these are from the book and that someone has just put these online. That's my guess. So hopefully this is not wrong to give you, but it's out there. It's a free resource, and the book gives you so much more than even this. So I highly recommend it. All right, now that you've seen that you have multiple options, I just wanted to give you a quick glimpse or a video of what this would look like typically. I'm going to give you 2 examples from 2 different age groups. Let me see if this is the one I wanted. Yes. I'm going to start it a little bit further in. I have to share my screen now so that you can see it too. Okay, so this is for probably an older elementary group, and the next one I'm going to show you is younger. This would probably work for middle school as well. Gosh, I'm so bad with looking at someone and knowing their age, so they might even be close to middle school. So that is a very big possibility. But even high school, some of these will work with them, especially think, pair, share. Kagan works across the board for all age groups. So I'm going to play this. Hopefully you can hear these videos when I'm playing them.
Students are engaged. They're all working with each other. The Kagan structure I used in this video is stand up, hand up, pair up. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Students stand up, they put their hand up, and then they pair up with someone else in the class. And with the task cards, I mean, the students had to pair up with every single other person in the class. During the structure, each student was kind of in charge of their own problem. So then they would kind of trade problems, they'd do each other's, and it was really nice because each student, I checked the answer to their problem before we started the structure. So they knew before they paired up that they could help someone with their problem. They knew they had the correct answer. So even the students who kind of struggle with math, at least they knew, okay, I know this one problem, and that can get them through the rest. It's really nice because during the structure, I was kind of freed up, so I could just wander around, listen in on conversations. If I noticed a student was really struggling, I could kind of pull them aside for a few minutes and work with them. They really start to just depend on each other, and they become so much more comfortable asking each other for help versus always coming to me with all the questions. Versus the traditional method, I mean, normally a math teacher would probably just say, okay, turn to page 50 in your book and do problems 1 through 28. Well, yeah, they would have done the same 28 problems, but through that, there may have been, 20 hands up in the class at the same time, like, oh, I don't get this one, I don't get this one. And during that, there's no way I could help all 30 kids at the same time. The content was exactly the same. They still did 28 math problems. They got a lot of practice dividing fractions. But instead of me having to be the person reteaching to every student and checking to make sure they got it right, they were kind of being their own teachers to each other.
So
It freed up.
I'm gonna go back it up for a second. So one thing I did, I'm sure you caught this, but just in case you didn't, that I thought was really smart is that she gave them a question and she made sure that each of them knew the answer, right? So that student has the question card in their hand, that's theirs that they're assigned to for the whole entire game. So if I have problem 6 and it's 1/3 minus 5/3, I'm just making something up, or flip that, then I know the answer. So when I pair up with a student, I say, okay, you get to answer my question, I'm answering yours. And if that student doesn't know how to do it, that student is the expert. I'm the expert for question number 6. So I can help them if they don't know how to do it. So I thought that was really smart. And hold on, I'm going to show you one more. Actually.
All right, guys, stand up, hand up.
My internet is...
Walk. Hair up. Go to the center if you haven't found. Thank you. Decide who's going first. Raise your hand. Okay, first person. Take a look at that landform. First person, tell them what it is. Second person, describe what an island is with. Three, two, one. Give your partner a great, great, great. Great, great, great. Off you go. Hand up, go. Pair up. Okay, first person, raise your hand. First person, take a look at that landform and tell your partner what it is. Second person, describe that landform. Three, two, one. Give your partner a good job, good buddy. Good job, good buddy. Hand up, go.
Okay, so you get the point. I'm going to put my headphone back in. Okay, so I'm sure you get the point of that. I did want to reiterate, see how much control she had over that classroom. You can tell that they practiced the procedures on this, because otherwise they would have been flying around the room and it would have been a mess, right? But she not only had, okay, do this, and then they knew what to do. She had a procedure. If someone doesn't have a partner, they come to the center. Who answers the question first raises their hand first. Her other procedure was, now you answer the question. All right, 1, 2, 3, and she counted down when it was time for her to speak, so that they knew, okay, I got to end what I'm saying. And then she had a fun little say good job, and she had 2 symbols, or good job, good buddy. I thought it was so cute. But that immediately just triggers their mind to go to something else, so that they don't just keep on and on with the other thing they were talking about. So really fun. And I would say, even if you teach, I know I've got some music teachers, I have some PE teachers in the making, I've elementary, middle, high, all this works for everybody. Okay, so keep in mind, I mean, you have to adjust it so that it works for your demographic and your content, but you can use these strategies for any grade level at any content if you can just tweak it to move to that. Okay, so that's cooperative learning. Those are the Kagan strategies. I hope that you can use those someday and either just download the documents I give you or get this book. It's so worth it. All right, so we went through these resources. Okay, so these are the evidence-based educational practices that are strongly reflected as really, really good research evidence-based practices for you, right? So this is in your textbook. You can go take a look at that as well, but all of these are so good. When you clearly communicate what you want. I've noticed too as a teacher, if you don't clearly communicate every single thing that you want, you're going to find that they're not going to meet your expectations. So if you want them to do things a certain way, you have to tell them, practice it, model it, and appraise it after they do it well. Excuse me, hold on. For some reason, I have a cough right now. So okay, had to get a water real quick. But yes, your communication on your expectations and what you say is going to make or break your classroom. And you have to know that even if you clearly communicate it, unless you practice it with them, reinforce it, I'm talking about every little thing you do. You're going to think, do they not just know how to do these things? But if you want it done your way, you have to teach it to them. And you have to be very, very clear on what you want. So that's going to save you a lot of time and trouble right there. Feedback is huge. That's going to be a question in your reading guide, so I'm not going to go over that in depth. A formative evaluation is a must. You have to make sure, check every day, are they getting it? Are they getting it? And you adjust your next lesson based on what you find out, if they are getting it or not. That's why we say reteaching. You have to have some kind of formative assessment the day before, so that the very beginning of your next class or with your starter, you can reteach that concept. If 70% of your class isn't getting it, it's probably not them. It's probably you needing to reteach the material. So definitely always assess. Concept mapping, I showed you an example of that. We've talked extensively about classroom behavioral interventions that you can do. Direct instruction, it's set up in the format just like your lesson plan was, so we've already really gone through that. Mastery learning, we haven't talked a lot about, but I would say that's huge. I am a huge proponent, and you probably can see this in how I teach, that I would rather you try it again and do it again and do it so that you actually get the material than just to say, oops, sorry, too bad, you get a 10% or 0. Because what is a 0 going to do for your knowledge? Really nothing. So there always has to be some kind of penalty so that it doesn't encourage a constant habit of just not doing things or not trying, because that's not acceptable. But if a student is truly not getting the information, I am a proponent of, okay, you failed this, you need to get it to mastery. I need you to do it again and do it correctly and show me that you know this information, because otherwise they're going on to the next grade without that content. It's, to me, is unacceptable, but not all teachers think that way. Peer tutoring, we've talked extensively about that. We just talked about cooperative learning with Kagan strategies. That is highly effective. And obviously my favorite and one of my number one is your teacher-student relationship, building positive rapport with your students. Because I have seen, in my experience of being in the classrooms, 2 teachers that I would say were excellent content teachers. They knew what to teach, but one of them could not connect with the student. They had no compassion. They could not ask them questions about their lives, make sure that they're doing fine, be a kind, compassionate person. One who was that way and one who was not. One who you think, do you even want to be a teacher? So the classroom management differences and behavior problems that those 2 teachers had were astounding. If you do not have good rapport in your classroom, you will most likely, and this is not, I did not pull this from research, this is Dr. Jones' experience that I've seen across the board. behavior management issues tend to be higher in classrooms where there is not a good rapport system. So keep that in mind. But even if you're the best teacher in the world, you could have behavior problems, but that's common, that's natural, right? That's why I give you strategies to handle that. But you want to have a good rapport. Okay, we're back to this too. See, I told you this is what I called space learning. I told you these things early on for a reason so that you at least had exposure to it. And now we're back again, right? So this is the RTI triangle. Remember that there are 3 tiers of support for RTI or MTSS. They're the same thing. You're going to hear both types in whatever school you teach in. Tier 1, do you remember what it is? Who is it geared towards? How much percent of the class? So remember, this is close to 80% of all the students are in tier 1. This is your typical classroom. All the students in your classroom should be getting some kind of support, core classroom instruction. That's just going to happen, right? And remember, you go through tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and then if you cannot make it through tier 3 and you're just still not doing well as a student, that's when you're probably going to be referred to special education. So keep that in mind as well. Tier 2 is a little bit more targeted. These are small groups. It's not one-to-one yet, but it's maybe 4 students in a group and you're teaching them similar tasks that maybe they're all struggling at. Tier 3 would be that intensive one-on-one, high-level interventions, which typically there's an RTI person in your school who will do this, but that's why the textbook, I was surprised that they didn't go through this, but they only go through tier 1 and tier 2 strategies, but they say tier 3 is not something that they're going to talk about in this textbook, and I'm assuming that's because there's usually an expert in the school who does that. So keep that in mind. I'm sorry, I'm still, I don't know why I'm coughing so much today, but I've got to get a drink of water. I'll be right back. Okay, we're back at it. So just to keep in mind what this is and what we had talked about previously, I'm just trying to remind you, because I know that was quite a few weeks ago that we did that. So tier 1 strategies is everything that I've already talked about, right? You can use everything that we've discussed in your classroom. So if you're to the point where that's not working and that student is still not getting it, even with all the accommodations you're putting in place, all the different types of strategies you're using, UDL, cooperative learning, everything, right? Still not working, you go to tier 2. And a couple strategies you can use here. First of all, conduct universal screenings to identify students. I am not going to go in depth on these 3 because you will have a question about this from your textbook. So you're going to actually look this up yourself. But also use screening data to group students. Use evidence-based instructional interventions, which keep in mind too that that one there is something that we talked heavily about. I think it was week 3. And I taught you how to go find evidence-based practices in the library. And that itself is a huge strategy. As you can tell, I'm trying to give you a fishing pole so you know how to fish rather than just say, here's a fish and you won't know how to find things. So you will be able to find any evidence-based strategy you ever want through that WKU library. And hopefully there's some resource out there for you when you become a teacher. That's one thing I don't like about the library system. Should be applicable or reachable from teachers. That's something, if I could change it, I would today. Okay, so this is very important. Explicit instruction is very close to that direct instruction that I had talked about, but explicit instruction, keep in mind that there are these 4 things that you have to do, and I think this is important for you to do in every lesson. First, you model and you teach it. I do. Show students the correct way. So it's I do, we do, you do is a great principle to use in all your lessons. Then after I do and I show you how to do it, now we're going to do it together with some teacher support. Independent practice is you do. Students practice alone. So you see how that's very similar to direct instruction, because how direct instruction is set up is an opener, instruction, guided practice, independent practice, assessment. Right, it's the same thing, but if you want to call it this so that your students get it, you'd say, I do, we do, you do. Now show me. So that's a really good strategy and practice to have. And then cumulative practice just means even if you learned how to count coins that day, you maybe have an assignment in a couple of weeks that you're doing something similar but not exact, and you would say, okay, we had a story problem about addition. Now let's get the coins out and I want you to add this money together. So you're bringing something you already learned back into the picture, okay? Tier 2 strategy continued. So this looks familiar, right? Something else that we'd already learned. So first of all, for a Tier 2 strategy, provide students with adequate time to practice skills. You have to realize that if you teach someone how to add, that first day they might still not know how to do it. You need to give them time, multiple examples, multiple opportunities, and with practice and repetition and time, they're going to get it. So sometimes teachers will say, okay, we're doing this one topic today, and then that's all they do. For pretty much every topic, and it's also in the literature because this was a huge portion of what I did for my dissertation research, so I've looked at this extensively, would be the fact that your lessons topics should cover multiple days. So of course you could have multiple lessons within a unit. That's why people have units, right? So a unit could be money, and you might teach 5 different things about money, but if you keep it in that same theme for a week or week and a half, then they're going to start to get it because they have enough time to do so. Okay, so that's one thing with a Tier 2 strategy, and I think that would apply really for Tier 1 as well. This here is the monitoring student progress, the CBM, which you will see in your textbook as well. It's basically allowing students to graph this, and it's very similar to what I talked about before. You can do this with behavior, you can do it with academics, and even though they don't have it here, I always recommend that baseline. Remember, we talked about baseline is before you intervene, you see what they will do without you doing anything, without any intervention. How are they doing really well at that problem? Are they continually not reading these 5 vocab words at all? And so they're getting a 0 out of 5, but after you implement the intervention, remember we had, actually it's gonna be the opposite for the screen. So baseline, 5 points, implement the intervention, and then hopefully it starts jumping up if you're wanting the information to increase, right? So same thing here. You want to see if these are probes, which means you give them how many words. Maybe give them 5 words. Do they get them correct or do they not? And that's what you are graphing, okay? Okay, like I mentioned earlier, Tier 3 strategies are really not covered in this book and in this text, so I'm not going to do so either. Usually there's some kind of an expert in the school who will take care of this, but if you have more questions, you can always look it up or ask me and I will find you the resources, okay? So that is it for today, and I think we've learned a lot and gone through a lot. If you have questions or need ideas or need anything at all, please let me know. I am hoping that by the time you are teaching that this quarantine thing is hopefully done so that I know cooperative learning can be quite different and difficult via Zoom. So I know that teachers are really trying to figure this out right now, but hopefully you'll be back in the classrooms by the time you start student teaching or doing your full-time job. I think you've got some great resources at your hands. Please download these things, like I said before, and keep them so that you have quick access to them in your future. All right, have a great week, everybody, and I will talk to you soon.